Today is Friday, August 14th, 2026, and today is National Creamsicle Day, which feels less like a holiday and more like your freezer gently reminding you that it has been trying to help this whole time. The creamsicle is beautifully uncomplicated. Orange on the outside, vanilla in the middle, and a wooden stick quietly holding the entire operation together. And honestly, that is more structural planning than some governments have managed. Because today, we're going to see the United States draw a territory so large that pieces of 5 future states fit inside it. Then, we'll visit Northern Ireland, where British troops arrived to keep 2 communities apart and stayed for nearly 38 years. And later, we'll find out how one of the world's most wanted men went to sleep in Sudan and woke up on his way to a French prison. Welcome to Wait, That's Random. This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and your reasonably calm guide through humanity's long history of strange decisions. In 1848, Oregon was not a state tucked into the upper left corner of the country. Oregon was enormous. Picture all of the present-day Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and then add western portions of Montana and Wyoming. That was the Oregon Territory Congress created on August 14, 1848, when President James K. Polk signed the bill establishing its government. For years, Britain and the United States had both claimed the broader Oregon country. They had essentially agreed to share it, which sounds neighborly until you remember that both countries expected the other one to leave eventually. In 1846, a treaty placed most of the boundary at the 49th parallel. 2 years later, the United States officially organized its side. But that word, organized, can make the land sound empty, like Congress had discovered a cluttered closet and finally brought some shelves. It wasn't empty. Indigenous nations had lived throughout the region for thousands of years. Traders, missionaries, and thousands of settlers had also arrived, many of them following the Oregon Trail. The new territorial government may have acknowledged native claims on paper, but the growing stream of newcomers pushed native people from their lands, frequently before treaties had even been negotiated. And Oregon's early laws carried another contradiction. Slavery was prohibited, but black people were also subjected to exclusion laws designed to force them out. The lawmakers opposed slavery without accepting equality, which tells you something important about how prejudice can change its wording without changing its purpose. The giant territory did not stay giant for long. Washington Territory was separated from it in 1853. Oregon became a state in 1859, and the remaining land was divided again. Eventually, one enormous shape on the map became pieces of 5 different states. And lines on a map always look clean. It's the people living around those lines who have to deal with what they mean. That was painfully clear in Northern Ireland in the summer of 1969. Northern Ireland was, and remains, part of the United Kingdom. Many Protestants identified as Unionists and wanted to stay that way. Many Catholics identified as nationalists and wanted a united Ireland. Those labels did not describe every individual, but they defined much of the political divide. Catholic communities also faced serious discrimination in housing, employment, and political representation. By the late 1960s, the civil rights movement was demanding reform, demonstrations were being attacked, and the tension was becoming increasingly violent. Then came the annual Apprentice Boys Parade in Derry, also officially called Londonderry, because even the city's name is tied to the disagreement. The parade passed near the predominantly Catholic Bogside neighborhood on August 12th. Confrontations escalated between the residents, March supporters, and the Royal Ulster's Constabulary. Stones and petrol bombs flew. Police used armored vehicles, water cannons, and CS gas. Barricades went up, and the fighting spread into other communities. By August 14th, the police were exhausted and losing control. The Northern Ireland government asked Britain to send in the army. At about 5 that afternoon, the first British soldiers moved into position. And here is the part that feels surprisingly now. Many Catholic residents initially welcomed them. People brought the soldiers tea and soup. Some smiled with relief because they saw the Army as a neutral barrier between their neighborhoods and the police force they deeply distrusted. Unionists generally welcomed the restoration of order, although some worried that London was beginning to interfere in Northern Ireland's government. The deployment was called Operation Banner. The welcome did not last. The Army's role expanded. Relations with nationalist communities deteriorated, and the soldiers became part of the conflict they had been sent to contain. Republican and loyalist paramilitaries carried out bombings and killings. Members of the security forces were killed, and security forces also killed civilians. Families and neighborhoods lived for decades with checkpoints, raids, funerals, fear, and the constant possibility that ordinary life could suddenly become dangerous. More than 300,000 members of the British Armed Forces would serve during Operation Banner. It became the longest continuous deployment in British military history. The soldiers who entered Derry on August 14, 1969, were responding to an immediate emergency. Operation Banner officially ended on July 31, 2007. That means Operation Banner lasted almost 38 years. Our next story is almost the reverse. A manhunt that lasted for decades and then ended in a bedroom before dawn. His real name was Elik Ramirez Sanchez. He was born in Venezuela, and his father, a committed Marxist, named him after Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. As a young man, Ramirez trained with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and adopted the name Carlos. The Jackal part came from the press. According to the widely repeated story, a reporter found a copy of Frederick Forsyth's novel, The Day of the Jackal, among belongings connected to Carlos, and the nickname stuck. It was perfect branding for a terrorist. Mysterious, predatory, and much more cinematic than Elik Ramirez Sanchez. By the 1970s, Carlos had become one of the world's most notorious militants. His most famous operation came in December 1975 when he led an attack on the OPEC meeting in Vienna. 3 people were killed, and more than 60 others, including government ministers, were taken hostage. Carlos and his group eventually flew some of the captives to North Africa before releasing them. His name became connected to assassinations, bombings, and hostage operations across Europe and the Middle East. Some connections were proven. Others grew out of rumor and his willingness to encourage his own legend. For years, governments protected him, tolerated him, or found him useful. But by the early 1990s, the Cold War was over. Old alliances were shifting, and Carlos was becoming less of an asset and more of a liability. He eventually settled in Khartoum, Sudan, where he lived under government protection. In August 1994, he underwent a medical procedure. Accounts disagree about exactly what kind, but afterward he was recovering and vulnerable. At around 3 a.m. on August 14th, security officers entered his room and restrained him. The exact legal and diplomatic choreography remains disputed, but Sudanese authorities transferred him to French intelligence agents without a conventional extradition proceeding. Carlos was bound, sedated, placed aboard a French aircraft, and flown to Paris. The man portrayed as an almost supernatural international outlaw had been captured while recovering in bed. France convicted him of murdering 2 French intelligence agents and an informant in 1975. Later trials added convictions for other attacks, and he remains imprisoned under multiple life sentences. But there is something fascinating about how thoroughly the nickname survived. Most people still don't recognize Elik Ramirez Sanchez. Say Carlos the Jackal, though, and suddenly there is a whole movie playing in their heads. Which brings us to another man whose legend became much larger and considerably quicker with a gun than the surviving evidence suggests. He was born in Georgia and received a classical education that included Latin, Greek, and French. Then he traveled to Philadelphia and earned a degree in dental surgery. So far, this is not exactly screaming Wild West. He opened a dental practice, but his health was already failing. His mother had died from tuberculosis, and now he had contracted the same disease. Doctors advised him to seek a warmer, drier climate, so he headed west. Dentistry gradually gave way to gambling. Gambling led to arguments, and arguments in Western saloons had a troubling tendency to involve firearms. Stories eventually credited him with killing more than a dozen men, although historians have found firm evidence for far fewer. He was dangerous, certainly, but the legend had much better aim than the documentation. His friendship with Wyatt Earp carried him into the most famous 30 seconds in Western history, the gunfight near the OK Corral. Born on August 14, 1851, he was John Henry Doc Holliday. And for lots of us, Doc Holliday does not enter the room looking like an old photograph. He enters looking like Val Kilmer in the 1993 movie Tombstone. Pale, sweating, courtly, lethal, and somehow amused by everyone around him. Kilmer's I'm Your Huckleberry became inseparable from the character. The film's memorable confrontations with Johnny Ringo were largely Hollywood inventions, but Kilmer captured the contradiction that made Doc interesting. A dying man behaving as if death were the one person in the room who couldn't intimidate him. Kilmer believed Tombstone was ultimately a love story between Doc and Wyatt. For Doc's death scene, he reportedly asked the crew to fill the bed with ice so his physical discomfort would match the pain of a dying man saying goodbye to his closest friend. That commitment helped turn an already legendary figure into something even stranger. A historical person now remembered partly through another man's performance. Today started with a territory that looked simple on a map, moved through a military operation whose name concealed nearly 38 years of human cost, and ended with two men whose nicknames became larger than their actual lives. History compressed complicated realities into convenient labels. Oregon, the Troubles, the Jackal, Doc. Those labels helped us remember, but the real story begins when we ask what they leave out. Anyway, if anyone needs me, I'll be eating a creamsicle and trying not to say, I'm your huckleberry, every time someone asks for a favor. And because Val Kilmer gave Doc the most fitting last words for a day full of lives that refuse to go according to plan, there is no normal life, Wyatt. There's just life. Now get on with it. If you'd like to hear more of my narration work, podcasts, or other projects, you can find everything at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for taking a weird little walk through history with me. I'll see you tomorrow.